Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to Night Watch by Terry Pratchett. Part 1. Sam Vimes sighed when he heard the scream, but he finished shaving before he did anything about it. Then he put his jacket on and strolled out into the wonderful late spring morning. Birds sang in the trees. Bees buzzed in the blossom. The sky was hazy, though, and thunderheads on the horizon threatened rain later. But for now, the air was hot and heavy. And in the old cesspit behind the gardener's shed, a young man was treading water. Well, treading, anyway. Vimes stood back a little way and lit a cigar. It probably wouldn't be a good idea to employ a naked flame any nearer to the pit. The fall from the shed roof had broken the crust. "Good morning," he said cheerfully. "Good morning, Your Grace," said the industrious treadler. The voice was higher pitched than Vimes expected, and he realized that, most unusually, the young man in the pit was in fact a young woman. It wasn't entirely unexpected. The Assassin's Guild was aware that women were at least equal to their brothers when it came to inventive killing, but it nevertheless changed the situation somewhat. "I don't believe we've met," said Vimes, "although I see you know who I am. You are—" "Wiggs, sir," said the swimmer. "Jocasta Wiggs. Honored to meet you, Your Grace." "Wiggs, eh?" said Vimes. "Famous family in the guild?" "Sir will do, by the way. I think I once broke your father's leg." "Yes, sir. He asked to be remembered to you," said Jocasta. "You're a bit young to be sent on this contract, aren't you?" said Vimes. "Not the contract, sir," said Jocasta, still paddling. "Come now, Miss Wiggs. The price on my head is at least—" "The Guild Council put it in abeyance, sir," said the dogged swimmer. "You're off the register. They're not accepting contracts on you at present." "Good grief. Why not?" "Couldn't say, sir," said Miss Wiggs. Her patient struggles had brought her to the edge of the pit, and now she was finding that the brickwork was in very good repair, quite slippery and offered no handholds. Vimes knew this because he'd spent several hours one afternoon carefully arranging that this should be so. "So, why were you sent then?" "Miss Band sent me as an exercise," said Jocasta. "I say, these bricks really are jolly tricky, aren't they?" "Yes," said Vimes, "they are. Have you been rude to Miss Band lately? Upset her in any way?" "Oh no, Your Grace. But she did say I was getting overconfident and would benefit from some advanced field work." "Ah, I see." Vimes tried to recall Miss Alice Band, one of the Assassin's Guild's stricter teachers. She was, he'd heard, very hot on practical lessons. "So, she sent you to kill me then?" he said. "No, sir. It's an exercise. I don't even have any crossbow bolts. I just had to find a spot where I could get you in my sights and then report back." "She'd believe you?" "Of course, sir," said Jocasta, looking rather hurt. "Guild honor, sir." Vimes took a deep breath. "You see, Miss Wiggs, Quite a few of your chums have tried to kill me at home in recent years, as you might expect. I take a dim view of this. Easy to see why, sir, said Jocasta, in the voice of one who knows that their only hope of escaping from their present predicament is reliant on the goodwill of another person who has no pressing reason to have any. And so you'd be amazed at the booby traps there are around the place, Vimes went on. Some of them are pretty cunning, even if I say it myself. I certainly never expected the tiles on the shed to shift like that, sir. They're on greased rails, said Vimes. Well done, sir. And quite a few of the traps drop you into something deadly, said Vimes. Lucky for me that I fell into this one, eh, sir? Oh, that one's deadly too, said Vimes. Eventually deadly, he sighed. He really wanted to discourage this sort of thing, but they'd put him off the register. It wasn't that he'd liked being shot at by hooded figures in the temporary employ of his many and varied enemies, but he'd always looked at it as some kind of vote of confidence. It showed that he was annoying the rich and arrogant people who ought to be annoyed. Besides, the Assassin's Guild was easy to outwit. They had strict rules which they followed quite honourably, and this was fine by Vimes, who, in certain practical areas, had no rules whatsoever. Off the register, eh? The only other person not on it anymore, it was rumoured, was Lord Veterinary, the patrician. The assassins understood the political game in the city better than anyone, and if they took you off the register, it was because they felt your departure would not only spoil the game, but also smash the board. I'd be jolly grateful if you could pull me out, sir, said Jocasta. What? Oh, yes. Sorry. Got clean clothes on, said Vimes. But when I get back to the house, I'll tell the butler to come down here with a ladder. How about that? Thank you very much, sir. Nice to have met you, sir. Vimes strode back to the house, off the register. Was he allowed to appeal? Perhaps, they thought. The scent rolled over him. He looked up. Overhead, a lilac tree was in bloom. He stared. Damn! Every year he forgot. Well, no, he never forgot. He just put the memories away like old silverware that you didn't want to tarnish, and every year they came back sharp and sparkling and stabbed him in the heart. And today, of all days, he reached up, and his hand trembled as he grasped a bloom and gently broke the stem. He sniffed at it. He stood for a moment, staring at nothing, and then he carried the sprig of lilac carefully back up to his dressing room. Willikins had prepared the official uniform for today. Sam Vimes stared at it blankly and then remembered. Watch committee. Right, the battered old breastplate wouldn't do, would it? Not for His Grace the Duke of Ankh, commander of the City Watch, Sir Samuel Vimes. Lord Veterinary had been very definite about that. Blast it. Blast it all the more because unfortunately Sam Vimes could see the point. He hated the official uniform, but he represented a bit more than just himself these days. Sam Vimes had been able to turn up for meetings with grubby armour, and even Sir Samuel Vimes could generally contrive to find a way to stay in street uniform at all times. But a duke... Well, a duke needed a bit of polish. A duke couldn't have the R's hanging out of his trousers when meeting foreign diplomats. Actually, even plain old Sam Vimes never had the R's hanging out of his trousers either. But no one would have actually started a war if he had. The plain old Sam Vimes had fought back. He got rid of most of the plumes and the stupid tights, and ended up with a dress uniform that at least looked as though its owner was male. But the helmet had gold decoration, and the bespoke armorers had made a new, gleaming breastplate with useless gold ornamentation on it. Sam Vimes felt like a class traitor every time he wore it. He hated being thought of as one of those people that wore stupid ornamental armor. It was guilt by association. He twirled the sprig of lilac in his fingers and smelled again the heady smell. Yes, it hadn't always been like this. Someone had just spoken to him. He looked up. "What?" he barked. "I inquired if her ladyship is well, your grace," said the butler, looking startled. "Are you feeling all right, your grace?" "What? Oh, yes. No, I'm fine. So is her ladyship. Yes, thank you. I popped in before I went outside. Mrs. Content is with her. She says it won't be for a while." "I have advised the kitchen to have plenty of hot water ready, your grace. Nevertheless," said Willikins, helping Vimes on with the guilty breastplate. "Yes, why do they need all that water, do you think?" "I couldn't say, your grace," said Willikins. "Probably best not to inquire." Vimes nodded. Sybil had already made it quite clear, with gentle tact, that he was not required on this particular case. It had been, he had to admit, a bit of a relief. He handed Willikins the sprig of lilac. The butler took it without comment, inserted it into a little silver tube of water that would keep it fresh for hours, and fixed it onto one of the breastplate straps. "Time moves on, doesn't it, your grace?" he said, dusting him down with a small brush. Vimes took out his watch. "It certainly does. Look, I'll drop in at the yard on my way to the palace, sign what needs signing, and I'll be back as soon as possible, all right?" Willikins gave him a look of almost unbutlerly concern. "I'm sure her ladyship will be fine, your grace," he said. "Of course, she is not young," said Vimes. "I would say she is richer in years than many other primi gravidae." "Primi gravidae," said Willikins smoothly. "But she is a well-built lady, if you don't mind me saying so, and her family have traditionally had very little trouble in the childbirth department." "Primi what?" "New mothers, your grace. I'm sure her ladyship would much rather know that you were running after miscreants than wearing a hole in the library carpet." "I expect you're right, Willikins. Oh yes, there's a young lady dog paddling in the old cesspit, Willikins." "Very good, your grace. I shall send the kitchen boy down there with a ladder directly. And a message to the Assassin's Guild?" "Good idea. She'll need clean clothes and a bath." "I think perhaps the hose in the old scullery might be more appropriate, your grace, to start with, at least." "Good point. See to it. And now I must be off." In the crowded main office of the Sidopolis Yard Watch House, Sergeant Cullen absent-mindedly adjusted the sprig of lilac that he'd stuck into his helmet like a plume.
"They go very strange, Nobby," he said.
leafing listlessly through the morning's paperwork. It's a copper thing. Happened to me when I had kids. You get tough. What do you mean, tough? Said Corporal Nobbs, possibly the best living demonstration that there was some smooth evolution between humans and animals. Well, said Cullen, leaning back in his chair, it's like, well, when you're our age. He looked at Nobby and hesitated. Nobby had been giving his age as probably 34 for years. The Nobbs family were not good at keeping count. I mean, when a man reaches a certain age, he tried again, he knows the world is never going to be perfect. He's got used to it being a bit manky, Nobby suggested. Tucked behind his ear, in the place usually reserved for his cigarette, was another wilting lilac flower. Exactly, said Cullen. Like it's never going to be perfect, so you just do the best you can, right? But when there's a kid on the way, well, suddenly a man sees it different. He thinks, my kid's going to have to grow up in this mess. Time to clean it up. Time to make it a better world. He gets a bit keen, full of ginger. When he hears about strong in the arm, it's going to be very hot around here for... Morning, Mr. Vimes! Talking about me, eh? Said Vimes, striding past them as they jerked to attention. He had not, in fact, heard any of the conversation, but Sergeant Cullen's face could be read like a book, and Vimes had learned it by heart years ago. Just wondering if the happy event, Cullen began, trailing after Vimes as he took the stairs 2 at a time. It hasn't, said Vimes shortly. He pushed open the door to his office. Morning, Carrot. Captain Carrot sprang to his feet and saluted. Morning, sir. Has lady... No, Carrot, she has not. What's been happening overnight? Carrot's gaze went to the sprig of lilac and back to Vimes's face. Nothing good, sir, he said. Another officer killed. Vimes stopped dead. Who? He demanded. Sergeant Strong in the arm, sir. Killed in Treacle Mine Road. Car, sir, again. Vimes glanced at his watch. They had 10 minutes to get to the palace, but time suddenly wasn't important anymore. He sat down at his desk. Witnesses. 3 this time, sir. That many. All dwarves. Strong in the arm wasn't even on duty, sir. He'd signed off and was picking up a rat pie and chips from a shop and walked out straight into Carcer. The devil stabbed him in the neck and ran for it. He must have thought we'd found him. We've been looking for the man for weeks, and he bumped into poor old Strong in the arm when all the dwarf was thinking of was his breakfast. Is Anglo on the trail? Up to a point, sir, said Carrot awkwardly. Why only up to a point? We assume it was Carcer. Dropped an aniseed bomb in Sattel Square. Almost pure oil. Vimes sighed. It was amazing how people adapted. The watch had a werewolf. That news had got around, in an underground kind of way. And so the criminals had evolved to survive in a society where the law had a very sensitive nose. Scent bombs were the solution. They didn't have to be that dramatic. You just dropped a little flask of pure peppermint or aniseed in the street where a lot of people would walk over it, and suddenly Sergeant Angua was facing 100. 1,000 crisscrossing trails and went to bed with a terrible headache. He listened gloomily as Carrot reported on men brought off leave or put on double shift, on informers pumped, pigeons stewed, grasses rustled, fingers held to the wind, ears put on the street. And he knew how little it all added up to. They still had fewer than 100 men in the watch, and that was including the canteen lady. There were 1 million people in the city and 1 billion places to hide. Ankh-Morpork was built of bolt holes. Besides, Carcer was a nightmare. Vimes was used to the other kinds of nut jobs, the ones that acted quite normally right up to the point where they hauled off and smashed someone with a poker for blowing their nose noisily. But Carcer was different. He was in two minds, but instead of them being in conflict, they were in competition. He had a demon on both shoulders, urging one another on. And yet, he smiled all the time, in a cheerful, chirpy sort of way, and he acted like the kind of rascal who made a dodgy living selling gold watches that go green after a week. And he appeared to be convinced, utterly convinced, that he never did anything really wrong. He'd stand there amid the carnage, blood on his hands and stolen jewelry in his pocket, and with an expression of injured innocence declare, "Me? What did I do?" And it was believable right up until you looked hard into those cheeky, smiling eyes and saw deep down the demons looking back. But you mustn't spend too much time looking at those eyes, because that'd mean you'd taken your eyes off his hands, and by now one of them held a knife. It was hard for the average copper to deal with people like that. They expected people, when heavily outnumbered, to give in or try to deal, or at least just stop moving. They didn't expect people to kill for a $5 watch. $100 watch, now that'd be different. This was Ankh-Morpork, after all. "Was Strong in the Arm married?" he said. "No, sir. Lived in New Cobblers with his parents." Parents, thought Vimes. That made it worse. "Anyone been to tell them?" he said. He asked. "And don't say it was Nobby. We don't want any repeat of that 'bet you $1 you're the Widow Jackson' nonsense." "I went, sir, as soon as we got the news." "Thank you. They took it badly." "They took it solemnly, sir." Vimes groaned. He could imagine the expressions. "I'll write them the official letter," he said, pulling open his desk. "Get someone to take it round, will you? And say I'll be over later. Perhaps this isn't the time to..." No, hold on. They were dwarves. Dwarves weren't bashful about money. "Forget that. Say we'll have all the details of his pension and so on. Died on duty too. Well, near enough. That's extra. It all adds up." He rummaged in his cupboards. "Where's his file?" "Here, sir," said Carrot, handing it over smoothly. "We are due at the palace at 10, sir. Watch committee. But I'm sure they'll understand," he added, seeing Vimes's face. "I'll go and clean out Strong in the Arms' locker, sir. And I expect the lads'll have a whip round for flowers and everything." Vimes pondered over a sheet of headed paper after the captain had gone. A file. He had to refer to a damn file. But there were so many coppers these days. A whip round for flowers, and a coffin. You look after your own. Sergeant Dickens had said that a long time ago. He wasn't good with words, least of all ones written down, but after a few glances at the file to refresh his memory, he wrote down the best he could think of. And they were all good words, and, more or less, they were the right ones. But, in truth, Strong on the Arm was just a decent dwarf who'd been paid to be a copper. He joined up because, these days, joining the watch was quite a good choice of career. The pay wasn't bad, there was a worthwhile pension, there was a wonderful medical scheme if you had the nerve to submit to Igor's ministrations in the cellar, and after a year or so, an Ankh-Morpork trained copper could leave the city and get a job in the watches of the other cities on the plain, with instant promotion. That was happening all the time. Sammies, they were called, even in towns that had never heard of Sam Vimes. He was just a little proud of that. Sammies meant watchmen who could think without their lips moving, who didn't take bribes much. And then only at the level of beer and donuts, which even Vimes recognized as the grease that helps the wheels run smoothly, and were, on the whole, trustworthy, for a given value of trust, at least. The sound of running feet indicated that Sergeant Detritus was bringing some of the latest trainees back from their morning run. He could hear the joddy Detritus had taught them. Somehow, you could tell it was made up by a troll.
Now we sing this stupid song, sing it as we run along. Why we sing this we don't know, we can't make the words rhyme properly. Sound off, sound off, sound off. 1, 2, many, lots. What?
It still irked Vimes that the little training school in the old lemonade factory was turning out so many coppers who quit the city the moment their probation was up. But it had its advantages. There were Sammies almost as far as Uberwald now, all speeding up the local promotion ladder. It helped, knowing names, and knowing that those names had been taught to salute him. The ebb and flow of politics often meant that the local rulers weren't talking to one another. But via the semaphore towers, the Sammies talked all the time. He realized he was humming a different song under his breath. It was a tune he'd forgotten for years. It went with the lilac. Scent and song together. He stopped, feeling guilty. He was finishing the letter when there was a knock at the door.
Nearly done,
he shouted.
It's me, sir,
said Constable Igor, pushing his head round the door, and then he added,
Igor, sir.
Yes, Igor, said Vimes, wondering not for the first time why anyone with stitches all round his head needed to tell anyone who he was. Footnote 1. The Igor employed by the watch as forensic specialist and medical aid was quite young, insofar as you could tell with an Igor, since useful limbs and other organs were passed on among Igors as others might hand on a pocket watch, and very modern in his thinking. He had a DA haircut with extended quiff, wore crepe soles, and sometimes forgot to lisp. End footnote 1. Yes, Eagle, said Vimes, wondering not for the first time why anyone with stitches all round his head needed to tell anyone who he was. I would just like to say, sir, that I could have got young Strong in the Arm back on his feet, sir, said Eagle, a shade reproachfully. Vimes sighed. Eagle's face was full of concern, tinged with disappointment. He had been prevented from plying his craft. He was naturally disappointed. We've been through this, Eagle. It's not like sewing a leg back on, and dwarves are dead set against that sort of thing. There's nothing supernatural about it, sir. I am a man of natural philosophy, and he was still warm when they brought him in. Those are the rules, Eagle. Thanks all the same. We know your heart is in the right place. They are in the right places, sir, said Eagle reproachfully. That's what I meant, Vimes said, without missing a beat, just as Eagle never did. Oh, very well, sir, said Eagle, giving up. He paused and then said, How is her ladyship, sir? Vimes had been expecting this. It was a terrible thing for a mind to do, but his had already presented him the idea of Eagle and Sybil in the same sentence. Not that he disliked Eagle. Quite the reverse. There were watchmen walking around the streets right now who wouldn't have legs if it wasn't for Eagle's genius with a needle. But... Fine. She's fine, he said abruptly. Only I heard that Mrs. Content was a bit Eagle, there are some areas where... Look, do you know anything about women and babies? Not in so many words, sir. But I find that once I've got someone on the slab and had a good, rummage around, I can sort out most things. Vimes's imagination actually shut down at this point. Thank you, Eagle, he managed, without his voice trembling. But Mrs. Content is a very experienced midwife. Just as you say, sir, said Eagle, but doubt rode on the words. And now I've got to go, said Vimes. It's going to be a long day. He ran down the stairs, tossed the letter to Sergeant Cullen, nodded to Carrot, and they set off at a fast walk for the palace. After the door had shut, one of the watchmen looked up from the desk where he'd been wrestling with a report and the effort of writing down, as policemen do, what ought to have happened. Sarge?
Yes, Corporal Ping.
Why are some of you wearing purple flowers, Sarge? There was a subtle change in the atmosphere, a suction of sound caused by many pairs of ears listening intently. All the officers in the room had stopped writing. I mean, I saw you and Reg and Nobby wearing them this time last year, and I wondered if we were all supposed to, Ping faltered. Sergeant Cullen's normally amiable eyes had narrowed, and the message they were sending was, You're on thin ice, lad, and it's starting to creak. I mean, my landlady's got a garden, and I could easily go and cut a... Ping went on in an uncharacteristic attempt at suicide.
You'd wear the lilac today, would you?
Said Cullen quietly. I just meant that if you wanted me to, I could go and...
Were you there?
said Cullen, getting to his feet so fast that his chair fell over. Steady, Fred, murmured Nobby. I didn't mean, Ping began. I mean, was I where, Sarge? Cullen leaned on his desk, bringing his round red face an inch away from Ping's nose.
If you don't know where there was, you weren't there,
he said in the same quiet voice. He stood up straight again.
Now, me and Nobby has got a job to do,
he said.
At ease, Ping. We are going out.
This was not being a good day for Corporal Ping.
Yes,
said Cullen. Standing orders, Sarge. You're the ranking officer, you see, and I'm orderly officer for the day. I wouldn't ask otherwise, but if you're going out, Sarge, you've got to tell me where you're going, just in case anyone has to contact you, see? I got to write it down in the book, in pen and everything, he added.
You know what day it is, Ping?
Said Cullen. 25th of May, Sarge.
And you know what that means, Ping?
It means, said Nobby, that anyone important enough to ask where we're going
knows where we've gone,
said Fred Cullen. The door slammed behind him. Bang! The cemetery of small gods was for the people who didn't know what happened next. They didn't know what they believed in, or if there was life after death, and often they didn't know what hit them. They'd gone through life being amiably uncertain until the ultimate certainty had claimed them at the last. Among the city's bone orchards, the cemetery was the equivalent of the drawer marked misc, as in miscellaneous, where people were interred in the glorious expectation of nothing very much. Most of the watch got buried there. Policemen, after a few years, found it hard enough to believe in people, let alone anyone they couldn't see. For once, it wasn't raining. The breeze shook the sooty poplars around the wall, making them rustle.
We ought to have brought some flowers,
said Cullen, as they made their way through the long grass. I could nick a few off some of the fresh graves, Sarge, Nobby volunteered.
Not the kind of thing I want to hear you saying at this time, Nobby,
said Cullen severely. Sorry, Sarge.
At a time like this, a man ought to be thinking of his immortal soul vis-a-vis the endless, mighty river that is history. I should do that if I was you, Nobby.
Right, Sarge, will do. I see someone's doing it already, Sarge. Up against one wall, lilac trees were growing. That is, at some point in the past, a lilac had been planted there and had given rise, as lilac will, to hundreds of whippy suckers, so that what had once been one stem was now a thicket. Every branch was covered in pale mauve blooms. The graves were still just visible in the tangled vegetation. In front of them stood cut-me-own-throat Dibble, Ankh-Morpork's least successful businessman, with a sprig of lilac in his hat. He caught sight of the watchmen and nodded to them. They nodded back. All three stood, looking down at the 7 graves. Only one had been maintained. The marble headstone on that one was shiny and moss-free. The turf was clipped. The stone border was sparkling. Moss had grown over the wooden markers of the other 6, but it had been scraped off the central one, revealing the name John Keel, and carved underneath by someone who had taken some pains was, "How do they rise up?" A huge wreath of lilac flowers, bound with purple ribbon, had been placed on the grave. On top of it, tied round with another piece of purple ribbon, was an egg. "Mrs. Palm and Mrs. Batty and some of the girls were up here earlier," said Dibbler. "And of course, Madam always makes sure there's the egg."
It's nice, the way they always remember,
said Sergeant Cullen. The 3 stood in silence. They were not, on the whole, men with a vocabulary designed for times like this. After a while, though, Nobby felt moved to speak. "He gave me a spoon once," he said to the air in general.
Yeah, I know,
said Cullen. "My dad pinched it off me when he come out of prison, but it was my spoon," said Nobby persistently. "That means a lot to a kid, your own spoon."
Come to that, he was the first person to make me a sergeant, said Cullen. Got busted again, of course, but I knew I could do it again then. He was a good copper.
"He bought a pie off me. First week I was starting out," said Dibbler. "Ate it all. Didn't spit out anything." There was more silence. After a while, Sergeant Cullen cleared his throat. A general signal to indicate that some sort of appropriate moment was now over. There was a general relaxation of muscles.
You know, we ought to come up here one day with a billhook and clear this lot up a bit, said the sergeant.
"You always say that, Sarge. Every year," said Nobby as they walked away. "And we never do."
If I had $1 for every copper's funeral I've attended up here, said Cullen, I'd have $19.50.
50 pence, said Nobby.
That was when Corporal Hildebiddle woke up just in time and banged on the lid, said Cullen. Before your time, of course. Everyone said it was an amazing recovery.
"Mr. Sergeant?" The 3 men turned. Coming towards them in a high-speed sidle was the black-clad, skinny figure of Legitimate Fist, the cemetery's resident gravedigger. Colin sighed.
Yes, Leggy,
he said. "Good morrow, sweet," the gravedigger began. But Sergeant Cullen waved a finger at him.
Stop that right now, he said. You know you've been warned before. None of that comic gravedigger stuff. It's not funny and it's not clever. Just say what you've got to say. No silly bits.
Leggy looked crestfallen. "Well, good sirs."
Leggy, I've known you for years,
said Cullen warily.
Just try, will you?
"The deacon wants them graves dug up, Fred," said Leggy in a sulky voice. "It's been more than 30 years, long past time they was in the crypts."
No,
said Fred Cullen. But I've got a nice shelf for him down there, Fred, Leggy pleaded. Right up near the front. We need the space, Fred. It's standing room only in here, and that's the truth. Even the worms have got to go in single file. Right up near the front, Fred, where I can chat to 'em when I'm having my tea. How about that? The watchman and Dibbler shared a glance. Most people in the city had been into Leggy's crypts, if only for a dare, and it had come as a shock to most of them to realize that solemn burial was not for eternity, but only for a handful of years, so that, in Leggy's words, my little wriggly helpers could do their work. After that, the last resting place was the crypts, and an entry in the huge ledgers. Leggy lived down there in the crypts. As he said, he was the only one who did, and he liked the company. Leggy was generally considered weird, but conscientiously so.
This isn't your idea, right?
Said Fred Cullen. Leggy looked down at his feet. The new deacon's a bit, well, new, he said. You know, keen, making changes. You told him why they're not being dug up, said Nobby. He said that's just ancient history, said Leggy. He says we all have to put the past behind us. And did you tell him he should take it up with veterinary? Said Nobby. Yes, and he said he was sure his lordship was a forward-thinking man who wouldn't cling to relics of the past, said Leggy. Sounds like he is new, said Dibbler. Yeah, said Nobby. And not likely to get old. It's okay, Leggy. You can say you've asked us. The gravedigger looked relieved. Thanks, Nobby, he said. And I'd just like to say that when your time comes, gents, you'll be on a good shelf with a view. I've put your names down in my ledger for them as comes after me.
Well, that's, very kind of you, Leggy,
said Cullen, wondering if it was, because of pressure of space. Bones in the crypt were stored by size, not by owner. There were rooms of ribs. There were avenues of femurs, and shelf after shelf of skulls up near the entrance. Of course, because a crypt without a lot of skulls wasn't a proper crypt at all. If some of the religions were right, and there really was bodily resurrection one day, Fred mused, there was going to be an awful lot of confusion and general milling about. I've got just the spot, Leggy began and then stopped. He pointed angrily towards the entrance. You know what I said about him coming up here? They turned. Corporal Red Shoe, a whole bouquet of lilac tied to his helmet, was walking solemnly up the gravel path. He had a long-handled shovel over his shoulder.
It's only Reg, said Fred. He's got a right to be here, Leggy. You know that. He's a dead man. I'm not having a dead man in my cemetery.
It's full of them, Leggy, said Dibbler, trying to calm the man down. Yeah, but the rest of them don't walk in and out.
Come on, Leggy. You act like this every year, said Fred Cullen. He can't help the way he was killed. Just because you're a zombie doesn't mean you're a bad person. He's a useful lad, Reg. Plus, it would be a lot neater up here if everyone looked after their plots like he does. Morning, Reg.
Red Shoe, grey-faced but smiling, nodded at the four of them and strolled on. "And bringing his own shovel too," muttered Leggy. "It's disgusting!"
"I've always thought it was rather, nice of him to do what he does," said Fred. "You let him alone, Leggy. If you start throwing stones at him like you did the year before last, Commander Vimes will get to hear about it and there'll be trouble. Be told, you're a good man with a
cadaver?" said Nobby.
But, Leggy, you weren't there, said Cullen. That's the start and finish of it. Reg was. That's all there is to it, Leggy. If you weren't there, you don't understand. Now you just run along and count the skulls again. I know you like that. Cheerio, Leggy.
Legitimate Fist watched them go as they walked away. Sergeant Cullen felt he was being measured up. "I've always wondered about his name," said Nobby, turning and waving. "I mean, legitimate."
Can't blame a mother for being proud, Nobby, said Cullen.